Welcome to Digital Dividends. We have on the show today Ravi Shankar Chaturvedi. He's Managing Director of Digital Planet at the Fletcher School, and more importantly for us, on the advisory board of ICRIER's Process Center for Digital Economy. Ravi, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Puja.
Ravi, you've just brought out the Digital Planet 2025 report that evaluates the progress of digital economies across 125 countries. Can't wait to hear from you about this report, and especially, the conclusions that you have reached for the two big countries, US and China, and of course, India.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here today, and really delighted. This is the fourth edition of our flagship work, the Digital Evolution Index. We started this back in 2013, and we've grown our coverage, from 50 countries at the start to 60 a few years later, and then subsequently in the third edition to 90, and now to 125. As more data becomes available on the world, we are able to expand this to cover, the entire digital planet, so to speak. And this particular edition has been a more fruitful, primarily because the world emerged out of a pandemic, and many of the data sources we draw from were either truncated or not updated, which meant that we needed to find several workarounds and proxies to be able to present this. So it was, I would say, looking back, far more effortful to produce this than it has been, producing the prior three editions put together. So we're really delighted that this is seen, the light of day, and it has some fascinating insights. To kick off one of the big ones, and I did, showcase that at the launch of the ICRIER, State of India's Digital Economy report during my talk. One of the most fascinating insights I think that we came out with, and it's very counterintuitive. It was received wisdom that there has been 2 years worth digital transformation around the world in the first 2 months of the pandemic. Yeah, sure. I mean, that was, for those of us who were sitting behind a computer screen, being able to do all the things that we do, it seemed like that. We could easily, substitute paper money for contactless payments. All our work, all our work was, in some sense, intermediated through the internet. All our entertainment happened through the internet. The internet wasn't created for that, but somehow it held together. All of that was great, but that only speaks to a sliver of the very connected parts of the global society. Our research shows that what we have seen between the years 2020 and 2023 is a global digital deceleration. What does that mean? So if you look at the growth rates, digital growth as the composite digital growth as we measure it across aspects of demand, supply, institutions, and innovation. And you look at the growth rate, the trajectory that the world was on, 4 years prior to the pandemic, and 4 years through and post pandemic. What you see is that the world, writ large, was on a faster clip towards digitalization pre-pandemic, and it has since slowed down. That should concern all of us. Because what has, in some sense, what the pandemic has done is it has, for those of us who are absolutely plugged into the digital economy, we have benefited the most. But those that were barely plugging in, they fell off the grid. So all the gains that we made, several of the gains that we made in the decade prior, and primarily in the 4 years prior to the pandemic, we've reversed, and we are at the risk of, if we don't take corrective action as a global society, we're at the risk of, losing momentum, and we create and deepen this chasm between the digital haves and the have-nots, even as AI becomes the next big issue, and we will talk about that in a bit. So that, I kind of wanted to set that as the larger context, and that context becomes very important for India, because when we think of India, India is simultaneously a country, a civilization, and a continent, and it isn't just but when you think of this giant, vast country of consumers, it isn't one India; it's at least three Indias. There is the extremely mobile, hyper-plugged India, which is about 300 odd million people. Then there is the striving middle class, which is another 300. But then the rest of India is, you could probably even create several more stratifications within. But you have at least three Indias there. So which India is doing well digitally is a big question we need to ask. And that is something, and there are implications for India, because as of today, two-thirds of India is digitally connected. A third of India is not, and a third of India is really in excess of about 500 million people. That is, the size of 1.5 Americas, or two Brazils, for lack of a better term. But I'll pause there. Go ahead.
But Ravi, my impression is, and I think most of us here in India believe that digital payments have penetrated to a large extent across all sections of Indian society and economy. Is that not reflecting in your study?
It is, and real-time payments have been a tremendous boost for India's, and we will talk about some of those comparisons between aspirational and near-peer benchmarks in a bit. Yes, I mean, again, the digital payments and everything that UPI has brought forth has been a tremendous game changer for India. There is nothing taking away. In fact, we can spend the whole day just talking about how transformational, the India stack, the combination of, India's unique ID, Aadhaar, and its mobile first, mobile based digital ecosystem and UPI have been, truly transformational. Transformational, yes, on the right trajectory, yes, but not enough to reach the bottom third yet. So more needs to be done. So the progress report, if I were to kind of put on my professorial hat, the progress report that I would probably, and because I'm a harsh grader, I would probably put India at a strong B plus or an A minus, but it has the potential of being an A plus or an A, and there's a gap there. But you're on the right trajectory, or the country is on the right trajectory.
And where do here in India, we always look at what US and China are doing, especially when we talk about everything digital. So what is this gap vis-a-vis these two countries?
It's fascinating.
And China, the report I read says that they too follow the mobile model, just like India does. So how are they doing for innovation? How are they doing for investments? What is the gap between what they're doing and what India is doing? How much do we have to cover? Does it look like we would cover it anytime soon?
Right. I mean, these are all fascinating questions. In answering them, I will, I'd like to talk not just about innovation and investments, because that is where most of our attention tends to be, but we should also talk about the other two I's, which are institutions and inclusion. And we will talk about that, right? I think so look, obviously, India's, in some sense, India is in a very fortunate position because it has two countries to benchmark to and learn from, even as it competes. I mean, obviously, there are elements of competition, but if we tone down the competitive rhetoric, there is much that India can learn from China, and there's much that India can learn from the United States. So I think we are better off focusing on what do we need to learn from these countries? What kind of, how, in some sense, India would be able to, get from what is a high momentum breakout country into standout status if it manages to borrow the best from every country, right? And absorb it, imbibe it, and put it into practice. So with that sort of a mindset. China. Let's talk about China. China's a very sui generis digital economy. It is one of the only two upper middle income countries in the standout zone. And it is the first time in our assessment. I mean, China's momentum has always been, extreme, and I say that I use that word in the most positive sense. So extreme that we had to stretch the chart to accommodate China's China's momentum. But this time, China managed to hit escape velocity and get into the standout zone, and so it is in that sense it is a watershed moment. And why is it a watershed moment? Because unlike the rest of its standout peers, China's digital economy, its entire digital ecosystem, is primarily mobile first. It's primarily mobile based. Now, that in itself is shall we say that in itself is an aspirational model for other mobile first economies such as India, Indonesia, Vietnam, that are all looking to accelerate their digital development, and primarily India, right? So there is hope. In some sense, every other standout economy has as many mobile devices as they do laptops, as they do several other digital devices, right? So we measure something called digital affluence in our index. Digital affluence basically is, at any given point in time, how many digital devices does every person have, authorized by them on the internet? Now, in more affluent economies, standout economies like the United States, most of Europe, Japan, et cetera, there are at least 3 or 4 devices, right? I mean, and that holds true for the upper third, the top third of India too. I mean, you probably have at least 4 devices that are authorized by you on the internet: your laptop, your phone, maybe a listening device that speaks to you when you speak to it, maybe a television that is connected to the internet. But that's not true for many other folks in India. There are probably, and I would make the argument that at least in remote parts of rural India, there probably still are people who share one mobile phone between 3 people, right? So that is device affluence, right? So China's device affluence is still primarily, is lower than its standout peers, but it's there is no gap in its mobile phone coverage. So there is an aspirational model that China offers. Yes, you can be. Up until today, we weren't sure if you could be a primarily mobile or a mobile first economy and still be a standout. Get into the standout zone. But China has proved us wrong. I mean, well, it didn't prove us wrong as much as has eliminated all doubt. Now, what we see is, how could this be? And I think the right way to look at China's ascension is, how could this be a template for India, Vietnam, and Indonesia? And I think there is a template there. There is a template there. There are subtle learnings, and we can talk about that. I did speak about this at the ICRIER event. I think China's done a phenomenal job. If there is one thing that India should absolutely learn from China, China's done a phenomenal job China has done a phenomenal job of integrating its rural population into the digital economy, not just as consumers, but as producers. Now, that is something that India has to absolutely learn. Rural consumers are not just consumers, they're producers too. They produce things of value that those of us living in urban parts of the country need. And creating that two-way flow, China has done a brilliant job of. That is something that India is still lacking. And I did speak about that at the event. So I think that is one area where India should absolutely learn from China, right? So
this is through applications, is it?
Not just applications. I mean, applications, two-sided markets. Rural India has enough stuff to sell, that those of us living in urban parts of the world need. So how is it that we have not created, two-sided markets? And there are some, but not nearly enough. Not nearly.
The ONDC is sort of an effort in that direction.
Potentially, yes. But there could be more. And we could spend the whole day. We could spend several days talking about this. But there are many more. So I think I'm just highlighting a few aspects where China can be an aspirational archetype for India. And so that's sort of one. Now, if you look at the United States and India, clearly, I mean, and by the way, you could spend several days on the interactive we built. You could draw these comparisons. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I can also probably walk you through the comparisons between the United States, China, and India, and demonstrate to you where the relative strengths and weaknesses are. You think we should do that?
Yeah, we could.
Okay,
We
so
should.
why don't we? Let me see if I can pull that up. All right, so let's see. Um, Give me a minute and I will try and share screen, but right. So let's spend a minute to look at this is the chart, and what I've done is I've populated the United States, China, and India here, right? And as you can see, the United States is a very high standout right here. China is, a high momentum, standout, and India is there, alongside Indonesia and Vietnam, advancing, lots of headroom for growth, and a decent momentum. But again, the headroom for growth means tremendous, scope for improvement. But so what you can do is analyze trends. I'm just, you could do several things here. I'm just going to go straight to benchmarks and then compare it to the global median. You could choose any median here, by the way. You could choose the World Bank's classification of high, upper, middle, lower income, or you could do it by region. But this, because we're picking countries that straddle the world or the planet. Let's just go with an aspirational high income median here. And when you look at in terms of state, clearly there are this is comparing India with China and the United States. You clearly see India's got some strengths. Its institutions, have been propelling forward. Supply infrastructure has gotten better. Lots of demand weaknesses. Lots of demand weaknesses, primarily because there are still about whichever way you cut it and measure it, anywhere between 500 to 600 million people yet to experience the internet. So still, soft demand, and this is in spite of all the Aadhaar, UPI related advances, right? So much more needs to be done, is the point, right? And then innovations there. There needs to be more. Again, this is, mind you, this is a relative comparison across 125 countries, right? Obviously, the United States on innovation is a giant, and we will talk about how AI has become a force multiplier in a bit. And its supply infrastructure, dominates the world. Institutions, clearly. I mean, the digital economy, as we know it, started in the United States, and it continues to dominate. China does well too. China, this is China. China does well. China's demand is in fact either on par or better than the United States. Still supply weaknesses, innovation there, there's a gap. I mean, if we were talking just about US and China, there is an innovation gap. And their institutions are weaker. In institutions, as we as we measure them, institutions are weaker compared to that of the United States and even India, for that matter. Now,
what would some of these institutions be?
So the way we measure institutions are, in some sense, it's a three-tier. I can show you how we measure institutions. Let me quickly go to the method and then show you. So institutions is so this is institutions. Institutions are, we think of institutions at three levels. Institutions, and core institutions and their effectiveness and trust is one dimension. The second dimension is institutions and the business environment. How open and our institutions fostering competition, our institutions being enablers of a fair, transparent, competitive economy. And then the third is institutions and the digital ecosystem. Our institutions doing their utmost to advance the digital economy. So when you take these three things and combine them, what you get is what I just shared. And let me go back to analyze trends, and then we go back to benchmarks. And I promised you we will keep it all aspirational: China, United States, and the median of high income countries. Now, that is state. But what is fascinating for India is its momentum. When you look at the momentum story, things look different. Now, China, again, dominates on demand momentum. China's demand momentum is on a tear. That is the aspirational model for India to emulate. Institutions are soft and weak in China, and it's doing fairly well on innovation. Its momentum is there. It's closing the gap, if you see, with the United States. Now, however, if you look at the shape, the shape tells you where the relative strengths are. India's momentum closely mirrors that of the United States.
Not far behind.
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
I'm saying not far behind.
Well, yeah, in momentum, India looks a lot like, and this is fascinating, right? India's momentum looks a lot like, that of the United States. However, again, I go back to what I said. Even as India, and we will talk about, what the implications are and what India should do. What India should do is take a learner's mindset and learn from the best. And it has things to learn from the Chinese model, which is, primarily what I talked about, especially demand, on the demand side. And there are things that it needs to learn, from the United States. So it needs to be able to, get the best from whoever is the best. But the larger point here is India's momentum closely mirrors that of the United States right now, which is good news. But then again, that's where I give it a strong B plus. It is capable of a lot more. I think that's the larger point.
Yeah. So, do you have any specifics coming out of the report on what are the learnings for India that you've just been talking about?
Right. So, some learnings, right? I mean, again, we just talked about how it should definitely adopt a learner's mindset and learn from and borrow from the best, and it should. If I were advising the Indian government, I would, and its policymakers, I would say it should aggressively look for best practices, from countries that do these things better than, and the United States and China are pretty good as, I mean, the worry always is that it would learn the wrong things from China and the wrong things from the United States. Neither country is perfect, but the hope here is, if India manages to learn from China how to accelerate demand, while learning from Europe how to create strong institutions, and learning from the United States how to improve supply, some combination of the United States and Europe on how to improve supply infrastructure, and from the United States on how to improve innovation. That is, those are the benchmarks. Turn to China for demand, turn to Europe for institutions, turn to America for innovation, and some combination of the Europe and the United States for infrastructure.
And tell us something about AI. What is the report finding on AI?
Right. So I mean, we can spend several days talking about AI, but the way we have, what we are seeing is that AI has created a tremendous amplification, and I did share some rushes at the event in Delhi. We measured innovation, without any AI related indicators or components, and looked at ranks, and then we looked at innovation with AI related components. And what you see is that AI has been a tremendous force multiplier. And so especially for countries that if it weren't for AI, several countries that lead would look weak on innovation, in the United States included. So AI has been, in that sense, a force multiplier of innovation. Now, it is also amplifying existing digital advantages and reinforcing the dominance of digitally advanced countries. What does this mean? I mean, what the implications of this are that it is, in some sense, creating a winner takes most, if not winner takes all scenario in the relationship between AI and digital development. So while strategic investments into AI are crucial, because AI increasingly has become this driver of innovation and competitiveness. Countries that fall behind might find it difficult to close the gap. So, I mean, I think the larger point here is we are barely, we are still about halfway through, muddling our way through trying to close the digital gap. What we are seeing is now this giant AI gap. So, so what are the learnings for India? India doesn't have the time to rest. It needs to, it is not an either or, it needs to do both.
So how does one go about doing this, closing the gap in AI and digital?
Well, I mean, several things, but let me see if I can capture a few things that it needs to do. So we already touched on how India needs to find the right benchmarks, and as I outlined, on the demand side, China's clearly a benchmark to follow. On the institutions, Europe is. On supply, some combination of Europe and the United States, and on innovation, absolutely the United States. Those are the North Stars, for lack of a better term. Israel too on innovation, by the way. Those are the North Stars. Now that we've fixed the North Stars, the one thing that I think India needs to do, philosophically, as it approaches this mission of closing the gap, is to think more about digital protections and more of digital protections and less of digital protectionism. Because the more India is open to innovations from the rest of the world, investments from the rest of the world, it benefits. A rising tide lifts all boats. So philosophically, and then how it manifests in each individual policy and minutia, that's for a later time. But philosophically, the mantra, if it were, would be more digital protections and less digital protectionism.
Right. And also say something about inclusion. You said the fourth I was inclusion. What are the learnings specifically for India on inclusion?
Right. So inclusion, I mean, so we measure inclusion, or, the progress to digital parity across 3 dimensions. I did, again, share some rushes when we were in Delhi together. So we look at, it's a handy way of looking at it. We measure gender, we measure inclusion by gender. Do women have as much access to all things digital as men do? Geography, do folks in rural parts of the country, in every country, have as much access as folks in the urban parts do? And the third, for lack of a better term, and to be cute with alliteration, is Gini, which is a socioeconomic classification, which is, do consumers in the bottom 40% of the socioeconomic, stratification have the same level of access as the top 60% of the country? So, and so where India has a lot of gap to cover is on the gender dimension. Well, India has gaps to cover. It has done fairly decently in closing the rural inclusion gap. It needs to do more, but there has been a significant effort, and it's paying off. The gender dimension needs a lot of attention. That is an area for improvement, and the socioeconomic dimension is also an area. So now, if you were to think about the intersection between gender and socioeconomic, then you can think about, women that are in the bottom 40% of the socioeconomic, hierarchy, for lack of a better term, are worse off. So
I can imagine those disparities would be large, but are they being covered? What's the pace of change?
So there is change. So again, to give credit where it is due, there is progress. There's tangible progress in closing the rural digital gap, but much more needs to be done in closing the gender digital gap and the socioeconomic digital gap. And that's where the 500 odd million people that are yet to see experience the joys of UPI, or or everything else that is a part of this great digital revolution happening in India. They're yet to see it or witness it or experience it.
I suppose there are some, structural legacy, social, cultural issues also that come into play every time we talk about anything that where we talk about the gender divide. Although I do have to say that I have personally seen a lot of women in the categories that you're talking about rely a lot on digital payments, at least. Much to my surprise, one does see it, but I can imagine that, countrywide, a lot needs to be done.
Right, you're absolutely right. And there again, there are templates here, right? I mean, so you see a lot more, and we don't measure gender digital inclusion between urban and rural parts of the country, but it's fairly well understood that women in urban parts of the country are more digitally included than women in peri-urban and rural parts of the country. So there is that gap. But you're absolutely right. I mean, women, and I think there is, in some sense, what India's policymakers would do well to replicate is look at what is working in the urban parts of the country and replicate that in the peri-urban and rural parts.
Right. Thank you so much.
The pleasure is entirely mine, Puja. This has been terrific.